Welcome back to Star Narratives, the podcast. This is accessible and relatable astrology that teaches you how to support your emotional health using the wisdom of the zodiac. I'm your host, Natha Campanella. Hey, I'm back. You guys, it's been really a month since I have released an interview podcast, and the part of me that really wants everything to be cut and dried and planned and with symmetry is going a little crazy because I skipped Gemini season and do not have a Gemini interview. Although I did do a great Gemini interview last year with Scott Hall. So if you're wanting to learn some Gemini stuff, you can find that one. That was in 2019. And today we're not going to be talking about Gemini or Cancer. Even though we are currently in Cancer season, it is June of 2020 as I record this. I do have a really amazing woman on today, though. So I'm going to introduce her in a minute. But before I do that, I want to let you know about something really cool that I'm launching. It's called the Hidden Wisdom Membership Circle. And it is a monthly membership where you get access to a whole bunch of content that you wouldn't otherwise. There's an extended weekly forecast where I go over everything happening astrologically in the week in detail. And there are some element principle practices where you get to really dive into the energetics of the four elements and the signs that go with them. And you can use these practices to discover how impactful each of the elements, and I'm talking about fire, earth, air, and water, are in your life and how you manage them. And you can learn how to really develop more contentment, more ease, and more self-knowing by doing these practices. And my favorite part of the membership is that you get 2 live monthly calls with me where we get to talk some astrology and I do some live chart interpretations for you. So it's worth checking out. You can find that at my website, nathacampanella.com. So we're talking to Taylor Elyse Morrison today. She is a woman of many hats. She is an entrepreneur, a speaker, a podcaster. She has a business called Inner Workout, and I really enjoyed getting to speak to her. She has a lot of Capricorn and a lot of Sagittarius in her chart, and so those are the signs that we really focus on. But she is so incredibly impressive. She's in the wellness industry, and her goal is to teach people how to do self-care in a more sustainable way. And I'm all about self-care. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. And right now, as we are dealing in pandemic times, as we are looking at things like Black Lives Matter, it's really important that we are all focusing in some way on our self-care. Because when we can really truly show up for ourselves, that's when we, first of all, have better health, better immunity, but it also means that we can better show up for the people in the world that really need us. So I'm excited to introduce you to Taylor today, and let's just go ahead and get started. Hi, Taylor. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm very excited to get to talk to you. I first found you on Super She when we were both teaching classes, and I always found myself really drawn to your videos because you just had this really clean and clear and kind of no nonsense, but also nurturing energy at the same time. So I wanted to reach out and see whether you would come be on the podcast. So welcome.
Oh my gosh, I need to save that. No nonsense, but nurturing. I feel like that sums me up in just a few words, 3 words. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. Before the show when we were chatting, I was saying I'm super excited for this conversation just because this isn't something that I've explored a ton, so I feel like I have so much to learn.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited because that no nonsense but nurturing really shows up strongly in your chart. And so I want to kind of explain it to you and, might help you to even like cement why that is, why that's your energy. But before we do that, do you want to just tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you're doing right now, work-wise or life-wise?
Yeah. So I run a self-care company called Inner Workout, and the whole goal is to help people build the skill of self-care. And when I talk about self-care, I don't just mean doing kind of the fluffy, lighter things that we like to assign to self-care. Like, I love baths, I love doing face masks, but I'm talking about the deeper work of self-care, which I define and which Inner Workout defines as listening within and responding in the most loving way possible. And outside of Inner Workout, I also host a personal development podcast called B School, and it's all about learning how to show up in life the way that you want to. I'm curious what my chart says about this, but I'm a person who has always worked really hard and like to achieve a lot. And that can go to an unhealthy place really easily. And so I have to ground myself often in what does success mean for me? What values am I aligning to as I do my work? Because otherwise I just start chasing other people's definitions of success. So that's kind of where B School came from.
So it's so interesting because when I'm talking to somebody, and the whole point of this podcast and one that I love is to find how the astrological archetypes show up. And what I find is that, a lot of times the person being interviewed, in this case you start talking almost in keywords. And I think I mentioned this in my email. So just to share with you and with everybody listening, you have 5 planets in the sign of Capricorn. So Capricorn is very wise. Capricorn people tend to have a bit more natural maturity than others do. And they definitely have this sense of no nonsense because they are naturally really hardworking and structured and even doubtful, sometimes cynical. But essentially what happens is that Capricorn as an archetype just doesn't have a lot of time or interest in fooling around. Capricorn is a leader and wants to generate success, right? Whether it's self-success or success for other people. And I really noticed that in watching your work and in reading on your website is that you have and Capricorn, by the way, is sort of a fatherly energy. And obviously it gets tricky when we're assigning, sexes to the archetype. So it's not that it necessarily has to be masculine, but there's this sense of, I'm here to show you the ropes and I'm here to guide you. And I may use a little bit of tough love in the process because you're going to learn it faster and you're going to learn it better if we have some real structure and boundary to work with. So I want to stop there and just hear from you, first of all, whether that resonates. And then also, how that kind of shows up in your work, assuming it resonates.
Yeah, but I was chuckling to myself because I felt like that was so true. Even in certain things, how I like things to be efficient. And when I was in school, I did pretty well at school always, but I was always found myself drawn to classes where I could put things into practice because it kind of felt like a waste just to read about how to do something. I wanted to see what it actually looked like in real life. And there's always been this sense of like wanting to learn and grow in the most practical and efficient way possible. So that resonated a lot with me. And then, yes, it's very hard for me to sugarcoat things, especially when I care about the person on the receiving end of whatever feedback that I'm giving. Of course, I want to be loving and I don't want to rip anyone apart, but I also I want people to know what they don't know so that they can get to wherever it is that they know. And so that Capricorn piece yeah, I just heard everything you're saying, even the maturity piece. Like, ever since I was a kid, people have always thought that I was way older than I was, just because I was always mature for my age. So yeah, I'm a little bit mind blown right now, because that makes a lot of sense. And like I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, as someone who is relatively new to looking at my chart into astrology, I know my sun sign, my moon sign, and my rising. And so I didn't necessarily realize how much Capricorn was in my chart, which Capricorn, I think, is my moon sign. So I knew it was there, but I didn't realize how predominantly it was there. And that is, yeah, coloring my everything in a new way now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's interesting because all of your Capricorn is in the fourth house, and the fourth house in astrology is very connected to this idea of coming home, um,
Mm-hmm.
coming home to our bodies, coming home to like a sense of being nurtured. And there's quite an emotional connection that comes along with the fourth house too. And the fourth house is connected to the mother. So you have this sort of duality of being both father and mother, and really being able to bring both of those elements into your work. And I'm curious, what made you decide to move towards like wellness in general, teaching people how to bring more wellness into their lives? Like, what was it that made you decide this is where I want to apply my skills?
Yeah, it really honestly wasn't something that I planned. So my first, there's, it's been this, actually, now that I'm saying it, it's been kind of a recurring theme. So in college, I got really into working out. Um, I'm someone who has generalized anxiety disorder, and so working out is something that really helped process my anxiety. And I went through and I got my group fitness certification, and it was kind of just at that point that I was working out so much, and I wanted to learn more of how people were programming the workouts and things that I was doing. And so I did that and ended up not really using it, not teaching, but I just thought it was interesting. And then I went into my career at corporate, pretty quickly realized that corporate wasn't for me. And so I then decided to leave corporate and work at a health and wellness startup. And my thought was just that health and wellness is so, it has such an effect on how you experience life. And part of what I was struggling with in corporate was just feeling like my job didn't really matter all that much. Um, we talked about things and everything like seemed like it was so urgent and so important. But at the end of the day, like if my boss, if we didn't do our jobs, like the company would still run. It was just kind of this like this forced sense of not importance, but there is just a lot of us doing things and having meetings because that's what we're supposed to do in business. So I switched into a career in wellness because I felt like it would have more impact. And then I ended up going back to a startup owned by a Fortune 100. And it didn't feel right again. And then inner workout just kind of came because during all of this, I just realized, I need to practice self-care because it's not natural for me. And I started talking about it and kept talking about it and saw other people were having the same problems as me. So I really come by this work because I guess I see that there's an impact in it, first and foremost in my own life. And I don't feel like I'm particularly good at being well, quote unquote, but I just know that it positively impacts me when I do it. So yeah, that was kind of a roundabout answer, but it kind of happened, and it also feels really necessary for me, and I enjoy sharing that with others.
I find that to be really true, that when we find ourselves called into some sort of like healing or wellness modality or career, that it usually starts from places of where we're not very good at doing those things for ourselves. And so we go on this journey of trying to self-heal. You mentioned the generalized anxiety disorder. And, when I'm looking at someone's chart and I see a lot of earth in their chart, and that's Virgo, Capricorn, or Taurus, those are signs that can bring about some anxiety. And I think especially with Capricorn and with Virgo too, and based on the chart that you gave me, it looks like you have a Virgo rising as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's this level of self-perfection and very high standards that you probably hold yourself to, that of course is going to ultimately, it's going to start off by being really hard and hopefully push you towards the avenues of self-healing. And it sounds like you're doing that. And of course, then it opens up and you start seeing, I want to teach other people how to do this. So I want to talk a little bit about the Sagittarius in your chart too, because I think you're going to love this. Obviously, your sun is in Sag, but you also have your North Node in Sagittarius. And so the sun talks about who we are, how we define ourselves, and it's very personal. And the North Node talks about what our soul is wanting to really dive into and kind of learn and chew on in this life. And it's interesting that both of these things are in the sign of Sagittarius, because once again, you mentioned some keywords here, feeling that your job at corporate just didn't really matter. So one of the things that Sag really needs in order to feel like everything is okay in the world is you need a sense that like there's higher meaning to stuff, like there's something going on here that's greater than me. I have to have meaning. I have to make meaning out of what I'm doing. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. So that's kind of what you just described about corporate. Does that sound true to you?
Yeah, I'm like getting chills right now because I honestly had struggled with this part of my chart because I'm not necessarily the most extroverted person, which I feel like Sag memes normally talk about that, like the social aspect of it. And the meaning and the impact piece is so, so important to me. And so, I feel really seen in that part of me right now.
Yeah. So it's interesting when I see like the sun and the North Node in the same sign, because our North Node placements are essentially things that can be very difficult for us. So here you have your Sagittarius sun, and Sagittarius can be a really outgoing sign. Sagittarius is typically like enthusiastic and philosophical and wise and playful, but there's something that is sort of blocking you from being able to experience that fully. As you progress through your life, you'll probably get better and better at it. But, I can totally see why you're like, I don't know that I relate to Sagittarius so much, but you definitely relate to the wanting to understand things in a very broad sense. And there's something else that's really important about Sagittarius, which is about truth, and really analyzing and looking at the kinds of truth that sort of shape perspectives. And I see some of that like in your Instagram, right? Is like really speaking about your personal truth, for example, and even some political truth, and certainly like looking at objectivity and, admitting to susceptibility to bias. Like these are all things that it seems anyway that you're exploring. And I see that also in your wellness work. It's like, I assume when you're working with clients, you are oftentimes asking them to like reassess, like, wow, that's an interesting belief that you have about your body. Tell me, does that really seem true? So I want to just open up the floor to you and you tell me what any of that made you think of.
Yeah, man, it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense. The truth stuff definitely is big for me. And I was just thinking about this today because I was looking at something that I've written on Instagram previously, and I was like, yeah, so much of what I write or so much of what I say on the podcast is me sharing where I'm at, but I love to bring in other sources, and I'm okay with changing my mind if I learn new things. But I find, and I don't know if this relates to this or not, but I find like lately I've been on Twitter more because I found that even though you have to filter a little bit more, you can find things that maybe aren't on like traditional news outlets that just haven't been amplified there. But I do find myself like really searching for the truth on Twitter and trying to verify things or understand where this different perspective is coming from, because also a lot of misinformation gets spread on Twitter too. So saying that with a grain of salt, but I've noticed that, or even being in some online conversations, I'm trying to bring this sense of like I totally get there's an organization that I was a member of that's going through some things right now, and I totally think that a lot of what they've done is wrong, but I also saw like where misinformation was happening, and so I'm trying to hold the organization accountable, but also make sure that people are coming from an informed place when they make their own decisions. And I don't know what parts of me that comes from, but that rung true for me.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we're talking about the nodes, and of course, nobody listening, including yourself, has a visual here, but we have a south node, and then all the way across the sky, we have a north node, and they're points in the sky. They're not planets, but they are the nodes of fate. So anytime that things are across the sky from each other, there's always a sense of balance that we are asked to try to maintain. And on the other side of the sky from Sagittarius is Gemini. So you naturally have this balance between Gemini and Sagittarius. Gemini is where you go in for the details, and you are really adept at figuring out, like, sifting through the information, figuring out what's important, figuring out what to communicate about the information, and then also kind of playing with this idea of perceiving without judging. And so the South Node, which, is sort of more comfortable to us. And I think that that's some of what you're talking about, is like your drive to sift through and really see the big picture of, it's not just what I'm going to find at first glance, it's deeper. And you even described some of that with your wellness work as, yeah, bubble baths, sheet masks, those are nice, they work, but it's not really the truth of self-care. And so what you're talking about is like really doing this North Node work of figuring out, like, what is the real truth? What is the big truth? And I'll tell you too, Taylor, that North Node and Sagittarius people, they really did come in to kind of, teach. It's a teacher placement. So you're already teaching, you're doing great teaching, but it just kind of tells me that you are really on the right path. And, whether it's what's happening currently in the world, or what's happening currently in your life, or what's happening in the life of your clients, there is a sense for you of, like, if you can keep digging out what's real and asking people to maybe change their perspectives a little bit. And I'm sure that that comes up in your wellness work, as having clients that show up that have a very specific self-image that you as the practitioner and you as the sort of loving, compassionate teacher can see is not true. And then figuring out, how can I get them to shift these ideas about who they are and what their body looks like and what their fitness is like, etc. So does that sound resonant to you?
Yeah, it was so interesting that you said that it's a teacher placement, because for a long time, as like when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a teacher, and I had a doll that came with a book that was called Taylor the Teacher. And it's, yeah, I don't always think of myself as sitting in that role, even though I do a lot of teaching and facilitating. But I am. So it was just nice to hear you reflect that back to me. And I want to encourage myself going forward to really lean into that part of myself.
Yeah, I love it when I'm talking to practitioners that are really able to see the places, like, okay, I want to lean into this piece. I'm not doing it perfectly because I think it just lends so much credibility. Like, I want to work with somebody that understands that they're not totally perfect and that they still have stuff that they're trying to juggle and work on. So I love that you just shared that.
Yeah, I feel like I'm learning so much about myself, or getting so many different lenses that I can start to use now. So yeah, this is so helpful. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Awesome. Well, so one more thing, because I have a few other questions that I want to ask you too, but I listened to one of your podcast episodes and really resonated. You were talking about deep work and how what you noticed when you were, and I think it was a book, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was like, was she talking about a podcast or a book? Anyway, it was a book called Deep Work, and you were talking about your relationship to distraction. And the South Node in Gemini is really, really naturally distractible because there's so much information coming in all the time. That's interesting information. And Gemini is an air sign. You also have your Saturn in an air sign. And the air signs are like so smart and have so much brain power, but also can get really lost with a million things coming in at once, and sort of this capacity to hold a bunch of balls in the air. But if you're not careful, to kind of lose track of the fact that you're also trying to live your life while holding balls in the air. So I just wanted to mention that and see whether it kind of made sense to you.
Yeah, I definitely feel that tension in my life, and I have to try and like ground myself more, or remind myself, hey, this is what I'm doing, or that just because I hear something interesting or think about something, I don't need to like Google it immediately, or different things like that, which has been, it's still something that I struggle with right now, but it's nice to see part of where that comes from.
Yeah, and I see places where you're really managing it well. Like, for example, when I go on your website, you do a lot of stuff. You have your podcast and inner workout, and you do public speaking, you do things for organizations. Like, you're clearly able to hold a lot of balls in the air. But also, I'm sure sometimes that gets a little like, okay, stop the Google. Don't Google that right away, Taylor.
Yeah, literally just like that. Sometimes I have to talk to myself and be like, okay, you do not need to look up if there's a flight deal to that place right now, or you don't have to go see how that person did that module on their website right now. You're working on writing something else. Like, it's very, I have to almost like metaphorically turn my head back and my attention back to what's straight ahead, instead of looking all over the place.
Yeah. So do you find, one of my questions was, I wanted to know what your clients typically come to you needing help with. And so is that one of the things? Like, do you find that you kind of call in clients that need a little bit of direction sometimes and a little bit of boundaries?
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of the work that I do right now is less one-on-one client work. But in general, what I see people who like have gone through a course, or people who are in whatever way engaged with me or with inner workout, I tend to get a lot of people who, I think because they resonate with me and what I share on inner workout or on the podcast, that they tend to have a lot of the same struggles as me, which can be like distraction or chasing after success without having that, without really thinking about what success looks like for them. So there's a lot of that. Yeah, I get people who have some element of me, but also who have really different elements as well. Like right now, I'm wrapping up a round of inner workout facilitator training, And it's interesting to see the areas that we all have in common, because even though you're learning how to lead and facilitate inner workout, by nature, it just ends up having a certain amount of personal development that goes along with it. And so it's interesting to see, oh yeah, this is what we're all working on and struggling with, but also this is what I'm learning from these people that I'm teaching, in the way that they're able to slow down and savor things, or in the types of questions that they ask. So there's definitely people who resonate and relate with certain aspects of me, but I'm also really thankful that they bring in these other things and I constantly get to learn as well.
Oh, yeah. I love that. And Sagittarius is the consummate learner. There's always going to be, with people that have a lot of Sag like you have, there's going to be this desire to explore the world through things like education or leaning into different perspectives. So what you just described is having students and clients that come that say, this is how I do it. And internally you're like, wow, that's really different from how I do it. And how interesting that I get to the inside view. So that's great. It's occurring to me. So when I reached out to you, I originally reached out to you because you had mentioned something about your Saturn return that was coming up. So you are 28 right now, and your Saturn return is showing up in May of 2021. I am so impressed with how much you have managed to accomplish already in your life.
I'm actually 27 too.
Oh, you are? Oh,
Yeah.
Yay. Okay. So, yeah, you are like, so let me tell you a little bit about Saturn return, right? And for anybody listening, Saturn return is like the stepping over the threshold into quote unquote adulthood. And that's weird because in our culture, we look at 18 like you're an adult, but astrologically, through our 20s, we are very experimental. We're kind of doing our thing, and very centered on self, really, where we're not necessarily tied down to some of the standard marriage, children, house purchase, etc. Sometimes people are, but there's something really powerful about our Saturn return, which is when Saturn makes its way all the way around the zodiac and gets back to where it was when we were born, because it sort of brings us this new vision for what we want for our lives. And for many people who have spent their 20s kind of, bumming around and, not, job to job or doing jobs that were kind of less responsibility, etc., they hit their Saturn return and they go, oh my God, because it can be this wake-up call. Saturn as a planet is very much the tough love planet that says it's time to take responsibility for what you're doing. And it's time to really start analyzing your relationship to authority. Are you playing by the quote unquote rules? Do you need to loosen up a bit, or do you need to sort of hunker down a bit? And what I see in your chart, especially with all of your Capricorn, is that when you hit your Saturn return, I cannot wait to see like what you do then, because you've already built this business. You have worked for these, big corporate companies. You have all of this experience. You're facilitating practitioners for, something that you created. Like, oh my God, I feel like you're going to kind of explode on the scene into even more success. And so I'm curious, knowing that, do you have like a vision for your future, for what you're wanting to create in the next few years?
Yeah. First of all, that was just encouraging to hear, because I have only kind of in a cursory way looked at my Saturn's return, and it kind of scared me. And so I was like, oh no, what is going to happen? I feel like I'm just hitting my stride. So that's exciting to me. And yeah, when I think about my vision, this probably comes as no surprise to you, but like when I look at my life and how I want it to feel. I really want there to be a sense of freedom and autonomy and impact. So that's kind of like underscoring everything that I do. I don't want to feel super tied to having to just exchange my time for money in the same way that I had to do when, like, if I work with a brand strategy client and it's like, here's your hourly rate, or here is this deliverable and I'll be paid X amount when I complete this. I like to have things that I can create and nurture and that can continue to work beyond me and have impact beyond me. So that's what's underscoring it. But I think in a few years, I would love to see inner workout grow and flourish and have more practitioners who are teaching it. Because right now I feel like it is very tied to me as the founder and as the main practitioner. But as I'm training more people, I'm excited to see how it continues to grow and evolve. Hopefully by that point, Corona will be over. So, because I'd love to do like retreats and in-person events, both for people who are certified facilitators, but also people who just resonate with the practice and have these like really healing times where we can come together and yes, do inner workout, but also have other conversations and experiences together. Yeah, I just picture, I see like different ways to partner with folks. That's something that's been really apparent to me in this time, is just so much of the way that business is being done is really, it takes advantage of people, in like people who are employees, but also a lot of times telling people, oh, you have this problem that you need to fix, and making people feel bad in order to sell things. And so I want to align myself and continue to grow with people who want to do business and are really in a really values driven way. So I see myself like continuing to do that and to have those partnerships growing. And it's not just me growing, but also these other values driven companies growing alongside of me. And so that we can keep feeding each other. And yeah, I would love, like in an absolute dream world, I would love for my husband to not have to work a full-time job anymore. He has like, he's got some business stuff that he does on the side, but he's also just a really, really talented in a lot of ways. His sun sign is Capricorn, which now makes a lot of sense why we get along so well. We've been together since high school, but I would love for him not to have to work in a corporate job, and still he would work, but that we would have flexibility in that area of our lives. Because I do still, even though I run a self-care company, I still work a good amount now. And I would love for that like time investment, I guess, to pay off in more freedom and flexibility for our future. So that was a lot of rambling, but hopefully that gave you an idea of where I want to go.
No, it made so much sense. You know, your Saturn is in the sign of Aquarius, and Aquarius is very much about liberation from old traditions. And Saturn, of course, makes us work for that. It doesn't come very easily with Saturn, but there is really something about when you set goals, when you dedicate yourself to something and get very structured about it, which is what Saturn wants us to do, which is sort of why I was asking you, like, what do you see for yourself? Because Saturn says, great, make a list. What needs to happen in order to, make this business less dependent on you? And so you're very much articulating exactly what your Saturn is wanting you to do, and you know it. So many people, and this is what makes a Saturn return so daunting for people, is that they don't spend any time or energy figuring out what is really important and what they want to move toward. And then the Saturn transits come and they're feeling like they're getting slapped across the face, because it's like, wait, what? So some things that kind of came up for me as I was listening to you is that Saturn, there are some things that will challenge you during your Saturn return, but my guess is that some of it will have to do around inner critic. Saturn is always connected to that voice in our head that tells us that we're doing something wrong. So to just be very aware for like what your inner critic is telling you about hard work, right? Because Capricorn wants to work really hard and put in the time and get the results. But also what I was hearing about with your Saturn and Aquarius is like, hey, I don't necessarily want to play by that old tired rule, because I would like to work less time, make more money, which is that breaking of tradition, breaking of that Capricorn Saturn tradition. And part of that is going to do with delegating, because Saturn people, once they learn how to delegate, then it's like cool, because Saturn is connected to the CEO. But in order to be a really, really good CEO, you need to work your way up from the bottom. You need to know how to do all of the stuff in your company. But ultimately, you have to be really good at parsing it out, the stuff that you don't like to do or the stuff that is not in your wheelhouse, like, you know, pay somebody else to do it. So I think that you are like, you're very grounded and you already know what you're supposed to do. But those are some Saturn tricks and traits to take along with you after our conversation.
Oh my goodness. I definitely was cringing a little bit at the delegation piece, because that's so hard for me. And I've gotten better by that little by little, like even with the podcast. Like at first I tried to, when I first did the podcast, which I'm realizing now probably this has a lot to do with the Capricorn in me, but I did 5-minute episodes 5 days a week for a whole year and didn't miss an episode. And for the first couple weeks of me doing that, I recorded all the episodes and also was editing them. And even if they're short, it still takes time to edit them. And so I hired an editor, and that made things a lot easier and freed me up. But then I was finding I was still spending like hours creating the podcast graphics and all of these different things. So I recently hired someone, even though I pulled back. I don't do 5 episodes a week anymore. But I hired someone who can just like make the graphics, make the show notes, things like that. And even that was a hard decision. And I had to really watch myself as I navigated that, because there's something in this I think might have to do with my Virgo rising, but you can tell me if I'm wrong, is I feel a deep sense of like I can do this, which is like the Capricorn of like, just work, you can do it, blah, blah, blah. But then also this, like, I'm the only person who can do it correctly the way that I want it to be, which I think might come from my Virgo. And so having to let go of things, which I know is what would give me capacity to really get to where I want to go. But it's so, it scares me a little bit. It really scares me, but it's interesting for you to confirm that, because that's not the first time I've heard that that's something that I need to do, and I kind of just ignore it. So I need to sit with that and explore what I need to delegate and what that would look like. Even right now, I have a couple of people who've reached out about being interns, and I've gone back and forth of if I want to do that or not, because what if they can't do this task as well as I can? And it's been a whole conversation in my head.
Oh my God, I'm like laughing along with you because I so relate to all of that. And yes, Virgo has this perfectionistic, like nobody is going to be able to do it in quite the way that I want it way. And Capricorn, I think, says, you know what, I can do it. Like I'm perfectly capable of doing it. But the truth, and this is great for all of you that are listening that are very Saturn in nature. Like if you're relating to what Taylor is sharing, the delegation piece is just so key, because you can't, one of my mentors, Sarah M. Chappell, she has this saying, and I don't know who she heard it from, but it's like, you can't hustle your way to $1 million. So, you know, it's like people like you and I, Taylor, that are very adept at, like I said, holding all the balls in the air and doing all the stuff. You know, you can't end up making your million when you're still editing podcast episodes. And you know what? I'm looking at myself here too. But there will be some good really some good work, some inner work that you can dig your teeth into over this next year or two. Your Saturn return will last about a year, so it'll take you through the end of 2021. So definitely, you're already like starting to feel it, but be really aware of those places where, like hire that intern and just kind of test it and just see, because I've had an experience where every time that I have hired somebody, I've been really pleasantly surprised at what they have taken off my plate. And there have been some imperfections, but that's okay. I can just go behind and kind of tidy it up. But anyway, you are not alone. I feel you on all of that.
I'm glad that I'm not alone, because some people have no problem delegating and it's so easy for them. And for me, it's this whole battle that has to happen before I can let anything go.
Yeah. So how can people find you if they want to work with you or they want to explore your work?
Yeah. The best place to connect with me personally is on Instagram at Taylor Elyse Morrison, and Elyse is ELY, like yo-yo, S-E. My personal website is taylorelyse.com, and that links to Inner Workout and the podcast and everything that I do.
Yay. Well, I really recommend checking you out. And this has been such a pleasure. Just so easy. And I feel like I could talk to you all day.
I feel the exact same way. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. I will talk to you soon, Taylor.
Okay, have a good one.
Okay, bye. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to work with me privately or read more about all of the numerous ways to work with me, visit my website, nathacampanella.com. I really appreciate any time that you take to leave a review of this podcast on any of the platforms that you listen on. It helps other people to find it. And of course, if you enjoy this podcast, share it widely and freely with those that you know and love. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.